the early starters to the Australian Farm Institute Roundtable Breakfast. My name is Katie McRobert. I'm the Australian Farm Institute Executive Director. We've got a very full agenda today. You'll hear more about that soon. But we're going to kick off with an informal conversation over breakfast about one of the ways we address policy issues in Australian agriculture, how our national advocates seek to put policy into action. So joining me this morning is National Farmers Federation President David Jochinke, DJ, who has agreed to subject himself to two very different grillings at the start and the end of today. If you've read the program, you'll see that we're finishing the day with a TV show rip-off. Would I lie to you? This in-conversation session may well end up mirroring a different television show. You can't ask that. Deej, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for the opportunity.
And we're going to dive straight in. So we want to talk about putting policy into action and walking the talk on these big issues that consume most of us in the room. We do make a lot of assumptions in our daily lives, and so not everybody in the room might know what National Farmers Federation is, what it does, who it represents, and how it's structured. So can you start off by telling us a little bit about the organisation?
Okay, thank you. So the National Farmers Federation was formed in 1979. We are a federation, true federation model, which means that all of our members are organisations who represent either states and territories or production systems or like-minded agricultural agencies across the nation. And so they're our direct members. So we don't have farmers as members, we have organisations as members. And those organisations obviously have connections to grassroots farmers, grassroots members themselves, and they come to us with a distilled policy that they've already had a position on. And if it's across commodity or cross jurisdiction, so state or territory, that's when the National Farmers Federation either get involved to lead, support or develop that policy. So for us, we don't step into areas that aren't ours, so if it's a state or commodity issue that's specific to that area, unless we're invited in, that's their policy, their autonomy. But when it's cross-commodity and it's something that benefits that cross-sectoral area, we make sure that we step up and help as much as possible to a consensus position policy that advances farmers' interests.
Okay, and there's almost 300 different organisations around the country that call themselves advocates for Australian agriculture. You don't represent all of those, or you're not a federation of all of those. Some of the organisations you would have in your fold would be the state farming organisations, the peak commodity councils, those kinds of larger groups. But you've also got some newer members, some unusual members in the fold as well. You've changed that in recent years. Why was that change made?
So out of that 300, not all of those are actually policy-based. Some of those are obviously production-based or they do have touch points for farmers, but their focus is slightly different. Yes, they will be interested in outcomes that government have and outcomes that affect their membership. But when you distill it down, advocacy is a very narrow field and very unique skill sets within that 300. So just to get some landscape and context. But of that, yes, we've tried to broaden our membership because we believe the more voices in the tent, the more voices that we can actually speak to. Yes, there'll be divergence. Yes, there'll be some dissent within that tent as well. So that's also a healthy thing. And we were just speaking about that earlier, that the more dissent you've got, it actually tests the concept of why do we have this position in the first place? Why do we support a certain outcome? Why do we support a certain way of if it's a farming system or a policy outcome, why is that the case? And sometimes to have an alternative view can actually challenge and enhance that. So for us, having as many farmer representative bodies within the tent and having them put forward good, robust policy, which means that it has had time to either go through a scientific base or a membership process where they've engaged with their members, had good cut through and engagement, and actually developed up something that can stand the rigours of government scrutiny. That's where we want to be. And as the National Farmers, we always believe that our members' is the strength, and the stronger membership that they have, the stronger policy we get.
So what does advocating mean to you personally, but also to the NFF? When you hear the word advocacy, how do you define that?
Advocacy, it's very simple for me. The policy creates the advocacy. So as we're always know that advocacy is a team sport, for starters, so that means we need everybody to participate, we need everybody to play a role, and that role is the engagement part, to develop up the position, and then advocacy is just then promoting that position to the people who have influence or people who are the decision makers that actually can influence that outcome.
Okay, but how do you promote that position? Is that a phone call? Is that a protest? Is that a discussion? Is it a town hall?
The black
is it a
box.
petition? Yeah.
So this is an interesting, it's more of a social question, I guess, than a process question, because it has changed. The way we have traditionally done business is that you'd go to the minister, and very few people would get access to the minister and to be able to influence their positions, or even to the media. There's a lot more narrow field to be able to get that influence in. With social media, with the ability for a lot of other interest groups to have alternative views being put forward, we now have to not only have a good, strong policy, but we actually have to advertise that policy either through our socials or through engagement with the media to another extent to demonstrate the social aspect of why we need that outcome. So it is actually a plethora of avenues to talk to a plethora of people, because the audience is the hearts and minds of the general public, then to show the politicians why it means something to their constituents, to actually mean that it's something good for industry. Previously, we could just talk about industry and why it was important to us. Now we've actually got to lift our eyes on the horizon a little bit more, incorporate a lot more avenues, because quite simply, there are a lot of other voices in that field.
So the way NFF as an organisation, though, is behaving and acting with the decision makers this year is very different to how it was 2 years ago. You've taken a very different line to your predecessor, which is the way organisations work. When new leadership comes in, new directions are undertaken. We did have a few, I can't tell you how many questions were texted to me when people found out I was going to be talking to you. One of the questions someone asked me to put to you was, is table thumping getting in the way of leadership?
Yeah, interesting conversation, because if you look at the previous way we called some issues some red line issues. So in agriculture, if you call something a red line issue, this is a hard line issue, and if you step over or proceed with this, well, what do we do? Do we just say, oh, well, we'll try to navigate our way through to another position, what's our fallback? A red line issue means that we will stand up and we'll have our voices heard, because other organisations are a lot more active in what we would probably call activist space, in promoting their position a lot more forcefully, and we saw that yesterday. So for us to mimic or take a little bit of a play out of that playbook, all of a sudden we're seen labelled differently. In fact, we're just executing what we were set up to put forward when we called it a red line issue. And if you have a look at what we're trying to promote, we're actually trying to promote an outcome that's got a solution. We're not just saying no, we're saying why, we're saying what we want, and quite clearly for us, it is about government engagement. And we've seen that also with the way that legislation and also engagement has been occurring in such a shorter time frame, that for true engagement, for better outcomes, government has to change the way that they want to engage with the broader community. And I feel that a lot of other organisations, a lot of other representative councils feel exactly in the same boat. It's just not agriculture that this is occurring to. So it is a collective voice of the way government has changed means that we've had to change as well.
You've got quite a complex relationship with government though too, because on one hand it's your job to stand up and tell them what you think and what your members think. On the other hand, you manage some significant projects for them, and you have a lot of personal relationships and you have a lot of business relationships with the government as well. How do you walk that fine line between maintaining those relationships but also calling out things that you're unhappy about when you're doing things like passing a motion of no confidence?
That's really simple. This is a business relationship. It is not a friendship. Yes, you might like personalities. Yes, you might like some of the cut of their jib, but at the end of the day, we both have a business to do, and that business is to promote the position of our constituents. Now, if that's a certain political party, they believe they have mandates. If it's a certain commodity group that puts forward a position, comes up through our process, that becomes my process on my position, and therefore that's what I need to advocate on. It's very simple lines between what each party has to do, and how we do it can change. And I've got to say too, like throughout this whole position, we've always had good contact with the ministers, we've always had good contact with the department, and that's the part, the bottom of the iceberg that nobody sees. The top of the iceberg is what plays out in the media and I guess the part that people focus on, but below that, we still engage with all of the different submissions, we still engage with all of the parliamentary inquiries, we still regularly meet with all key ministers. So for us, yes, it has burnt some political capital, but we believe there is an outcome that we want to achieve, and sometimes to make an omelette, you've got to break a few eggs.
And when you say the part that people focus on, that's also the part you're drawing focus to as well, to be fair. That's where you're taking people's attention. So that's part of that omelette making process. You've said that there's been an avalanche of bad ideas coming out of government. Do you want to go through a couple of those?
Well, if we want to start with water, that's been a challenge for a long time, and now with government buybacks, I'm pretty sure that there wouldn't be anybody in those communities that wouldn't be concerned about both the future and the way the policy is being rolled out. So if they were to put forward a position where they could identify a certain area that would be shut down, and then what the alternative industry would be before they started putting tenders into the water market, well, that would be a better outcome. So once again, an example of what we could consider a bad policy and potentially a better outcome by the engagement process and getting that right in the first place. We talk about industrial relations and the reform policies that have been absolutely what we considered rammed through, and the consequences of what that could mean through the one that we're just discussing now is the working holiday makers. So the actual fact of taking away the 88 days, what that would mean to regional communities. For us, we know that's on the table, and what we're trying to do is promote what the benefits are for keeping that scheme. Look at the cattle case and the fact that it's been delayed once again past this current election, so that potentially that's off the table of why we shouldn't be discussing it. For us, it's wrong. It happened 13 years ago, and the government still hasn't been able to resolve and settle the case, and they're meant to be a model litigant. Just an example of the frustration that's out there. And so when you say avalanche, it's as much of the frustration that's coming to us from producers of not having these other issues resolved. And then, of course, the elephant in that room is the live export of sheep out of WA, which we called a red line issue once again last year, and we're very clear that we wanted to take action of promoting that as an example of an industry that's changed and yet still being cancelled. Now, the actual industry itself per se has been the flashpoint, but it's the principle that it instills is the concern across all agriculture.
So some of the sort of bigger macro pressures for agriculture to think about in the coming years include declining terms of trade, anti-competitive practices, and intense pressure for resources, particularly land resources, in a decarbonising economy. Has NFF got a position on that it's advancing?
Well, so for us, once again, production is front and centre. And we'll participate in the carbon discussion up until when the alternative, the other hypothesis is that we start taking productive land out of commission purely to achieve a carbon outcome. We've got to be able to manage both at the same time. We've got to be able to maintain the productivity of our farmers to be able to participate. Yes, that means that changes have to be done in practice in how we measure what we do. But even for the simple fact that in a lot of farms, additionality of carbon in soil is near impossible, and the fact that we're maintaining carbon while still producing even though it's not large increases per annum, we're still increasing per annum small amounts, is an absolute achievement that we don't get acknowledged for. And the thought of being able to produce European soils in our environment is a furphy because it is rainfall dependent. We do have a low rainfall environment. So when we have discussions around carbon, there's got to be some gravitas of what the reality is and what can actually be achieved. So there'll be a line that we come to. And once again, the words primary production means that we are the start of any industry. So if you're going to invest in carbon somewhere, it should be at the primary source, and then the secondary industries should be able to help wash through. And potentially with, it's the nitrogen impact in a lot of areas that actually blows out a lot of the carbon in our production systems. And if we can come to different alternative energy sources to generate nitrogen especially, it actually helps agriculture knowing. So agriculture has a part to play, but there's other influences in that area. And when we come to other policy that we should be leading in, some of the aspects that we don't celebrate enough is the fact that we are world leaders in animal welfare. We do lead the race in aspects of chemistry on our broadacre farming, in the fact that we do have such a high technology adoption that we take for granted but don't celebrate. So sometimes, in my eyes, that we don't actually celebrate what we've got before being asked to achieve another hurdle that potentially may not be achievable.
That's fair. There's a lot of focus at the moment too on environmental markets, and NFF has been involved in a lot of these conversations on how farmers can be incentivised to transition to more sustainable practices by the introduction of environmental markets to make sure that they're rewarded for these activities. The flip side, though, of taking a market-based approach is that when you're talking about something like land use and resource pressure, if that land is now more valuable for growing carbon than it was for running sheep or growing grain, then the market says, I will take that land into this kind of production because that's what suits me. I'm a market, I have no morals. How do you manage these free market tensions without enforcing regulation when farmers don't want more regulation on top of what they're already doing?
So regulation to keep the land as productive?
Yeah.
So just to put it on the table here, I'm a farmer, therefore I'm a capitalist. Just to make that clear, I produce food. I believe that it's got some great community benefits, but I like to be paid for producing that food. I don't do it for free, and neither should we expect anyone to do it for free. So there is always a capitalist element to this. So when we talk to markets, a really interesting conversation we had at the Nature Positive Summit the other week was, a tree is only valuable until you cut it down. A fish is only valuable until you caught it. So how do you give an environmental number on something that you'll keep in place in situ without actually collecting it? So will that number be greater or less than what you could use the land for or the oceans for in its current state? That's the real dilemma here of understanding what that is, and will the market lead it? And for what my perspective is, the market's got a lot of maturing to do before we can actually have a discussion of what is the value and will it ever outstrip what the current land is used for? Noting once again, our sustainability framework, our sustainability matrix are some of the world leaders. So if we're trying to achieve an outcome of, once again, the sustainability or nature positive, what's the end state? Are we trying to produce food? Are we trying to collect carbon or plant more trees? And there is a tension there that will have an equilibrium, but if you go to the economics at the moment, being rewarded for what we do is the place that we should be looking at, but we shouldn't be trying to discount farmland in the process of collecting carbon.
You have referenced live export a couple of times in there, or at least animal welfare as well. There's been an argument put that the response by the agricultural industry to the live export phase-out was far too late. It's not like this current government didn't clearly communicate what they were planning to do before they even came into office and then restated it when they got into office. And potentially you could say that going back to 2011, that was when the writing was on the wall and perhaps the industry needed to have some hard conversations. What's your view on whether or not it's too little too late when it comes to something like the live export response?
Well, number one, SCAS. So I don't know anyone in this room who doesn't believe SCAS isn't a good system. You can audit it. You can make sure we can find issues within the system. And by finding issues, it proves that the system actually works. Number two, who else has got a SCAS system globally? No one. So once again, why aren't we celebrating the fact that we have developed a response to something that is a critical issue? And there wouldn't be a producer out there that wasn't absolutely disgusted with what they saw and wouldn't support an uplift in animal welfare through that whole process. Number three, I'll talk about the principle once again. The principle being that industry has invested, it was told to change, and industry being beyond the farm gate as well. When you finish your meal today, are you concerned about the dishwashing detergent that's used to wash your plate? Are you concerned about how the tablecloths are washed? Probably not. But in the live sheep export, once it leaves the farmer's fence, their property, we are concerned what happens beyond. And that's something that, once again, we should be celebrating. We actually have concerns. We have put in policies and processes to make sure that we are responsible. But once again, thirdly, the fact that the principle of an industry that has changed and has been doing massive improvements can still be cancelled from a policy that was only introduced into an election 15 days before the election. If it was a hardcore policy, they would have been a lot more upfront, we believe, than putting it in essentially 2 weeks before the election, like they did with a lot of other core policies, to be called a mandate, is a little bit disingenuous. And then finally, when you talk what should have happened in the past, that is agriculture evolving. I'm pretty sure our forefathers, when they were using DDT or whatever industry changes were made, they were doing what they thought was the best at the time, and things change, things do evolve, and we need to adapt, absolutely, in agriculture. And we should never be frightened of putting our hands up to say that, yes, we can do better. But when we've done better, when we've asked to achieve something and we're still being dictated to by external influences, not being spoken to during the whole policy development, let alone the decision, that's an outcome that we have to stand up for. Against, as far as put our shoulder to the wheel.
So it's some interesting examples in there though too. So what happens when change is not enough? What is NFF's role? Because there are increasing pressures and there's likely to be probably some significant restructuring of agriculture in the next 20 years, thinking about what's happened in the past 20 or 50 years and how things have changed. Things do change, and some things become unacceptable to society, whether or not we like that or whether or not we think that's defensible. The majority sometimes has a view that is different to what our view might be. I didn't wear a seatbelt in a car when I was a kid, and now I will not leave the driveway unless my kids have their seatbelts on. That's a very different example, but our expectations of what is normal and what is acceptable and what we like to have happening in society do change. So what is NFF's role if these increasing pressures mean restructuring and a different way to produce food and fibre in this country? How do you lead people through that?
Excellent segue to talk about what is NFF's vision and what is our mission statement. We are to lead Australian agriculture. So we are not afraid to be playing in fields that we haven't traditionally been in. So when we talk about social issues, when we talk about Indigenous issues, when we talk about trying to navigate social licence, and some people may not like that word, other people want to dive deeper into that. We have a committee dedicated to those aspects that we want to try to understand and navigate. And some of that is us actually being proud and telling our story, because you do have to cut the head off of an animal to extract the chops. And we have become so good at what we do, the consumer is now a lot further away from their food source than they've ever been, because it's so readily available in the different commercial outlets. So to be upfront and say, and give people the opportunity to understand more about where their food comes from is a step in the right direction, and to actually have those honest discussions as farmers. And once again, just having this discussion earlier, whenever anybody says I'm just a farmer, that is so belittling of what they do and how they do things. We are about making sure that people are proud, and when they go to that barbecue and have the discussion with the people who aren't involved in agriculture, that is where it starts. It's actually us at the grassroots bringing people along with the journey, going, I did my Nuffield a few years ago, and my favourite thing, because you were by yourself a fair bit when travelling around, my favourite thing was hopping on a train or something, saddling up to anybody who could speak English, and say, what did you have for breakfast? They'd say, cereal.
It's not creepy at all.
It's not, but it's as simple as that, to go, well, okay, that's awesome. Where'd the oats come from? Where'd the milk come from? You know, to actually just get people to think about the fact that you click the seatbelt in because you want to be safe. The reason why you buy Australian bread is not because it's cheaper, it's the fact that there's a whole quality system behind there. The value is not the price. So to be proud of the value of what we produce is something that grassroots we need to do more of. And by the way, we are getting smaller and smaller of both the economy and the population. So we've got to be our own advocates here. No one's going to ride a horse over the hill and save us. We have to do it for ourselves. And so that means that, first of all, we've got to get that pride back in having those conversations. So just a farmer is something that we're all going to delete. It is, I am a farmer. I am proud of what I produce, and I'm proud of the fact that I use technology in some of the world-leading standards.
So was that one of the underlying reasons to hold a rally in Canberra and bring people together, is to demonstrate that unity and that pride?
Well, it was to demonstrate the frustration that we weren't being engaged in properly in the process. And I was very fortunate that both Tony and I had the opportunity to meet the PM and the Ag Minister prior to the rally, and we put it very clear to them. The easy thing is that you start engaging with us in a meaningful way, in a timely manner. And we had a commitment that they would try to do more of that. We also made a commitment that we wouldn't be going down quietly on issues that we believe are, once again, red line issues that we identified and gave plenty of warning about.
There are a lot of different issues being waved about on placards at that rally. My favourite placard, which is not an issue, but just because it was my favourite, was the succulent Chinese meal sign being held up the back. Some people were there for different purposes, obviously, than others. But given the different mix of messages, do you think that you made a clear statement to Canberra?
Well, once again, to go to the highest office of the nation prior to a rally and have a discussion at that level of what the rally is about, that's a tick in the yes column as far as I'm concerned. And is it about trying to get media cut through? Who's our audience? Our audience was the PM. The audience was to make sure that he understood that the frustration levels were extreme and that we need to change the way we're doing business to make it better for all of us. Because at the end of the day, they are the government of the day. They're the ones we need to work with. They're the ones that have the ultimate say in policy outcomes because they hold the numbers in the House of Reps. So they are the ones we need to engage with. And we just want that to be a fruitful relationship, not one of last-minute submissions, one of policy or one of procedure that is limiting and what we would consider not friendly to agriculture. So,
given the different pressures that came together to result in this rally and where it sort of started from with the Keep the Sheep movement, the big question is the tail wagging the dog when it comes to Australian agricultural representation?
So, depends. If you're talking the dog being grassroots members being frustrated and wanting to hear their voice heard, that's my job.
What if you're talking organisations in a federation?
We had the ability to run a motion at our members' council of which there was a mixed view, absolutely there was, and there should be. As we said earlier, dissent is a healthy process. The rally was going to go ahead regardless. Let's put that into context as well. So do you miss the opportunity to vent the frustration of grassroots farmers of, by the way, I get as many phone calls as anyone in the room to get direct feedback from people who are either happy or not happy with what their position is. But the key theme of what I've been receiving lately is that they are exhausted and frustrated with the current status. We need to do something, and something is better than nothing, so get on with doing something.
Okay. So final question so that you and I can go grab some breakfast before we kick off properly. Grassroots farmers are definitely frustrated. They're not the only ones who are frustrated. A lot of the leaders and influencers within organisations across Australia for agricultural advocacy are also quite frustrated. One of them quite publicly dumped you because of various reasons, but partly because of their disengagement with what happened around the rally as well as financial issues. If that was to happen for a number of different organisations, NFF would no longer be representing nationally farmers across these different groups. Will NFF still be here this time next year? So
let's just start back with the principle of what we said earlier. Strong members make NFF strong, so members are important to us. The case you've just cited is an organisation that's gone through a lot of change and that's affected them financially. Noting too, when I was everybody knows I was once the Victorian Farmers Federation president as well, and previous to that we actually put a notice of resignation into the NFF as well. The world has not stopped, the sun's kept coming up as well, so the reality is it's just once again them venting their frustration. It is a very blunt way of doing that. And what we have to do is work through of how can we make sure that the system, that the mechanism of representation is fit for purpose in 2024, and we'll have the same discussion in 2029 because we need to. You can't just set and forget structures, but we have to make sure we understand function before form. So we are wanting to be deliberate about having the discussion with going, how do we achieve the best outcome for all members? How do we make sure that that is representative? And then how do we fund this thing? Advocacy doesn't sell memberships. This is the challenge, and we've always had the discussion around the freeloader effect that you can stand up there and get an outcome for agriculture, which, by the way, 90% of the time we're preventing things from happening, 10% of the time we're actually forwarding a great outcome. So when we're preventing something from happening, everyone benefits from that, but nobody sees it. Nobody, because everyone, we socialise the benefit and capitalise the cost. The cost of running advocacy businesses solely is why we need to look at other revenue opportunities, and that's why we do look at projects, and those projects are agricultural based. That's why a lot of our members have services that they engage in to make membership more attractive. And farmers are very savvy nowadays too. Like they understand there's different ways and different avenues to have their voice heard. So we've got to be best on field as a collective and be as unified as possible on issues. And that's why, once again, consensus is a great outcome. We can't achieve it always, but we do endeavour to that to be the key principle of policy development.
That other income issue though, I know I said it was the last question, but just to finish this question off, the plus side of having those projects and having that relationship with the federal government in particular is that you've got the National Farmers Federation, you've got the voice of Australian farmers involved in developing and delivering these really important projects for Australian agriculture. On the other side, you're now in some ways financially dependent on an entity which you are also constitutionally bound to sometimes disagree with. Surely that brings attention into the situation where you're passing a motion of no confidence in the very people who are also funding your organisation.
I think that's a demonstration of how it should work. If I'm not satisfied, I should be able to stand up and say we're not happy. And just because a department has given you a project, it doesn't mean that you are now owned and beholden to that department. Neither should we. Our policy is not for sale. And there's not a farmer member in Australia that would accept that as being the case. So, quite frankly, once again, I reject the notion that we can be bought. I reject the notion that we get sidelined because we take on these projects. We do it because we believe in the project will improve agriculture. We believe that it's beneficial to farmers. But we also understand that our role isn't there for the people who run the project. Our role is extremely simple: to lead Australian agriculture, which means the farmers on the ground are our most important constituents.
I'll let you off the hook now and we can go and have some breakfast. Thank you very much, DJ, for joining me in conversation and for taking on some of those trickier questions as well with such openness and transparency. And I'd like the people in the room to thank David Jochinke for joining us.
Thanks, Katie.
We'll let you finish off your breakfast and then we'll be starting the program proper at 9 o'clock sharp. Thanks, everyone.